Welcome to On the Agenda, Steptoe's guide to state attorneys general and other enforcement, regulation, and compliance matters. From AI to smokestacks, consumer protection to financial services, data privacy to antitrust. Join Steptoe's seasoned litigators, counselors, and advisors as they deliver the critical insights and industry knowledge that government officials respect and that companies, nonprofits, and executives can use to navigate whatever legal challenges they face.
Michelle, we're back. We are co-hosting what I believe is officially the longest-running podcast about state attorneys general in Steptoe's illustrious history. So congratulations to us. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our next episode of On the Agenda. I'm Eric Berman. I'm a partner here in Steptoe's DC office. I practice in our consumer litigation group. I represent clients in government investigations, state attorneys general, Federal Trade Commission, DOJ, that sort of thing. And I'm very happy to be joined once again by my partner in crime, Michelle Kallen. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Eric. Excited to be here with you today. I, too, am a partner in Steptoe's Washington, D.C. office, where I co-host the firm's appellate practice and work with Eric to help clients navigate complex matters before state attorneys general and advising clients navigating new and evolving areas of law. I come to Steptoe by way of the state AG world, where I served in the Virginia Office of the Attorney General as Solicitor General of Virginia. Our guest today is Brian Kane, the Executive Director of the National Association of Attorneys General, also known as NAAG. Brian assumed his role in September of 2022, following a distinguished career in public service. Among his roles leading up to his position at NAAG, Brian served as Chief Deputy Attorney General in the Idaho Attorney General's office, where he acted as a key liaison between the Attorney General and state and local and federal governments. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Great to be here and really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all about the National Association of Attorneys General.
Well, Brian, you've had an impressive career in public service, including more than 2 decades in the Idaho AG's office and now leading NAAG. What drew you to this role and what keeps you energized about the work?
To be honest, I really enjoy public service. I've kind of dedicated myself to service throughout my career. Before I went to college, I was in the U.S. Army for 4 years and kind of understood the importance of service, and our nation relies on volunteers to kind of step up and serve in different roles. What keeps me going is I think that, if we talk about our nation at different inflection points, we probably have a very serious discussion about confidence in government. And so anything that I can do to help inject more confidence in government, I think is valuable service. And I think that the attorneys general are one of those repositories within our nation where we continue to maintain confidence in what they're doing and what they're able to do on behalf of their citizens and our nation.
Yeah, attorneys general have been such an important part of our system of government from the beginning of the drafting. States' roles from the beginning of the drafting of the Constitution till today are very important, and state AGs have played a very important role in the checks and balances system, too, vis-a-vis the federal government. So you've been the executive director of NAAG now for 3 years. Looking back, what accomplishments are you most proud of?
So I think when I first joined the organization, there was a little bit of turmoil and uncertainty surrounding the National Association of Attorneys General when I first joined it. And I think that over the past 3 years, we've been able to reestablish some lines of communication among attorneys general. We've reorganized the organization, and we've kind of we've increased our productivity. A good example of that is the year that I joined, we had about 126 programs for attorneys general. This year, we're on pace to offer more than 200 programs for attorneys general. And so we've really taken what was a good organization and propelled it to become a great organization. And I think we continue to work in that direction.
That's wonderful. And by the way, Brian, I'll start off by saying thank you for your service, of course. And I guess just maybe take a step back. I'm sure that our listeners are familiar with, probably their local state AG or what state attorneys general do overall, but may not be as familiar with what NAAG, as sort of the overarching nonprofit that brings the AGs together, does. So could you describe for our audience what does NAAG do and what's its role?
Sure. And I can even offer to do it very simply. Our mission can be summed up in 3 words: convene, train, and support. We bring the attorneys general on issues of common interest and where they need to communicate with one another and work together to effectuate meaningful change. We train them. We offer trainings to all the attorneys general in a variety of topics, from litigation and trial advocacy to management and leadership to paralegal training, to we even bring like AG IT officers and fiscal officers together because of the specialized nature of AG and state work. And then we support them. We are a resource in the areas of antitrust, Supreme Court, tobacco, consumer protection, criminal law, bankruptcy, you name it, and we have experts on staff that can help AGs address things, and we also facilitate. Right, one of the greatest resources of AGs is there's probably more than 30,000 attorneys working across the nation, which means that if an issue pops up in an AG's office, somebody somewhere has probably dealt with it in some fashion or another. And so we can act as kind of a hub on a wagon wheel to connect them up and get them the expertise to make them effective in a very cost effective manner.
Absolutely. And let's key in on that word collaboration. And I know that you've emphasized bipartisan collaboration. You mentioned confidence in government, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school to say that there's at least a perception that our government is a bit divided these days. But the state AGs necessarily aren't. What are some of the initiatives that you've focused on to champion bipartisan collaboration amongst the AGs?
Well, I think the hallmark of collaboration starts with the Master Settlement Agreement in tobacco. And that goes all the way back to 1998. The attorneys general came together, entered into that landmark settlement, and it continues to be in effect to this day. Last year, more than $5 billion in payments under the Master Settlement Agreement were distributed among the states. And then it continues to build in the areas of consumer protection. And then there are certain legal and policy issues where we've seen attorneys general be very effective, in particular with youth safety or human trafficking. And so I think that, to me, Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost once described the National Association as a giant Venn diagram. And if you drew an R circle and a D circle, they would overlap. And the biggest part of that circle would be things that are in common. And there would be about 10% on each side that maybe doesn't come in under the National Association. And Eric, you referenced the fact that, we feel divided as a nation, but if you really pierce, there's a lot of things that we still agree on. And I think the attorneys general do a phenomenal job of kind of focusing on the things that we agree on and being effective on behalf of our citizens.
Yeah, when we actually talk directly to each other, we realize that there's more that unites us than we realize. And your role is to facilitate those conversations, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is the multi-state investigation and enforcement actions. I mean, those are such a hallmark of AG work, and they often bring AGs together. How does NAAG help facilitate these efforts? And are there challenges that you see in maintaining bipartisan coalitions there? Or do you find that that's a place where there has been a lot of good and productive bipartisanship?
So, to your point, there has been a lot of good and productive bipartisan participation. From time to time, the AGs may look at an issue and say, you know what, that's not really affecting the citizens of my state, or I'm not ready to jump in on that. And I think that what helps it is there's mutual respect, right? If an attorney general says, yep, we want to be a part of it, there's room for them. And if they say, you know what, this one isn't for us, there's no judgment that comes along with that. If anything, folks respect the fact that, an 80% solution is probably more doable than 100% solution. And I think that, the AGs collectively have really they really understand the fact that you can't let perfection get in the way of progress. And I think that the collaborations you see, right, it's very rare that you see all 56 jurisdictions on something. It happens, but even in the ones where we get 50 or so, there's still a couple that aren't there. And they usually have very good reasons for it.
Is there something that you think those collaborations and the positive experience you've had at NAAG working with state AGs to have that sort of collaboration, is there something there that it can teach us about potential consensus more broadly?
I think that actually Eric hit upon it, right? Is that when we sit down and talk to one another, we find out we agree on far more things than we disagree. And the question mark is on the things that we disagree, do they so poison the conversation that we can't continue to collaborate? And I think the attorneys general have done an excellent job of demonstrating that those things on the externalities of that Venn diagram aren't enough to tank the whole ability of them to work effectively together. I don't know that there's a more powerful legal force in our nation than all of the attorneys general working together on the same issue.
I had to smile a little bit when you mentioned, you don't always get all 50 states, but sometimes you do. And this whole topic of consensus, because maybe a decade ago, I had a matter that was brought by the Federal Trade Commission, and I think there were 57 plaintiffs, because when you add up the AGs, the charity enforcers, the secretaries of state, you get 57 plaintiffs, and it's a lot to navigate, but it shows a unanimity on, for example, consumer protection issues. But that kind of gets us into the relationship with the federal government and the new administration. So given that NAAG operates at that intersection, how do you see NAAG's role with, AGs in response to the new administration?
AGs continue to work closely with the federal government. Like, it's impossible at times to function as effectively as AGs can without the assistance and collaboration of the federal government. And we continue to have good relationships with the FTC, the FCC, the FDA, the DOJ. The DOJ right now, Attorney General Bondi was a former state attorney general, and so she knows the space very well. And she still has a number of folks that not only are they professional colleagues, but they're also friends because of her time within the attorney general ranks. And we even have an executive working group that's comprised of AGs and prosecutors from around the nation that works with the DOJ on a fairly regular basis. And so those relationships are still there. They're still functioning. They may have changed a little bit, and the federal government may have stepped back in some roles, but that doesn't mean there's not still communication and collaboration occurring.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, the current chair of the Federal Trade Commission used to have Michelle's job.
Right.
So another example of someone understanding the value of the states.
Yeah, and just to chime in there, 2 out of the 3 FTC commissioners are former state solicitors general. Our Solicitor General of the United States, we have our first former state Solicitor General, who's now Solicitor General of the United States. So that's a testament to the flow of talent that goes between state AG offices and the federal government.
Yeah, and I think, to me, that's a great recognition of the degree of talent that attorney general offices have been able to muster within their ranks. I mean, they've got phenomenal leadership, and then they've got phenomenal legal talent that they put together on these teams. And so, the fact that we have these folks rising to these other positions is a reinforcement of that. And I think it also helps to inspire folks within attorney general offices to say, we're working towards something, right? We can go to work every day with passion and purpose and believe in what we're doing. And that's a huge difference.
Absolutely. And having said that, I think there is a perception that the federal government is pursuing more of a deregulatory agenda. And so some of the states step in to fill in the enforcement gaps. Is that your observation, or do you have any thoughts on that, whether some states are increasing enforcement and others are paring back, that sort of thing?
I think that's an accurate observation. And I think it's accurate. And I'm just going to use consumer protection as an example, right? If one entity steps back, for example, their role in enforcement, it's not like we're losing unhappy consumers, right? They're still unhappy. It's just, where are they going to find somebody that can help them out with whatever their issue is? And so what we're seeing that the pressure on the attorneys general is actually increasing because citizens expect redress for their grievances, right? It's a hallmark of our institutions of government. And so the great thing is that the attorneys general have established a collaborative landscape that allows them to absorb it, right? That's one of the benefits of them being able to collaborate and approach these things on scale.
So many of our listeners are in-house counsel or other executives at companies that interact with state AG offices. What should corporate leaders understand about how AGs set their enforcement priorities?
I think the first piece of advice I would offer to your general counsel clients is attorneys general are human. And as humans, part of what they do is built on relationships. And one of the things that I've observed over time is sometimes folks wait until things go wrong to try to establish a relationship. And if you want to have a meaningful relationship, you have to first have be familiar and then have foundation of trust and credibility. And so what I would recommend to folks is if you don't know your AG and you haven't met with them or interacted with them, I would recommend that they get in there and meet with them, and even the consumer protection chiefs and other elements of the office, the regulatory mechanisms that they interact with. And I think that, to me, there are general counsels that can probably do that. But I also think that folks like Eric and Michelle, you all are, the system, you know how to navigate the labyrinth of an AG's office. And to me, that's one of your great benefits is being a wayfinder for establishing those meaningful relationships.
Yeah, and I found even in this role now, moving from the state AG world to private practice, if it's a state AG's office where, for example, I don't know folks as well, NAAG has been such a fantastic resource to connect really great people with each other and to be able to work through issues, one, to just make connections to be able to know what each other does. But then if an issue arises, if a client receives some sort of inquiry from a state attorney general, to connect up with the right people who can help move the ball forward in a productive way. And NAG's been a phenomenal resource.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of our functions is to help you to facilitate and help you navigate those avenues within AG offices.
One of the other things that NAG has done, and I've been really impressed by, is the role that NAG has played in training AG staff on topics like antitrust, consumer protection, data privacy. I was wondering, what trends do you see in areas that corporate clients should be preparing for in these areas or other areas?
To me, I think number one, consumer protection is always going to be a premier issue for attorneys general. But I think that how technology impacts those consumer protection responsibilities becomes a big issue. Attorneys general have become very active in the social media and artificial intelligence spaces. The AGs recently got together on a letter with regard to deepfakes and things of that nature. And I think that, to me, one of our functions at the National Association is how do we maintain the agility to keep up with emerging trends so that the attorneys general and their folks are never playing catch up, right? They're always on that kind of leading edge of whatever's coming down the pipe. And to me, part of the value of our relationships with the private sector, the folks that you all represent, is sometimes you're our best resource because you could say, hey, this may not have popped up on your radar yet, but be aware this is coming down the pipe and we'd be happy to serve as subject matter experts or to help you understand it. Or if you have questions as you deal with it. To me, that also goes back to that foundational relationship of trust and credibility and how important that is.
Yeah, and deepfakes. I mean, talk about a great example of consensus,
Right.
bipartisan and federal state. You've got the federal Take It Down Act. I believe the First Lady was the driving force behind that. The Federal Trade Commission can enforce it, and the states can enforce it. So everyone's on board.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that's been fun seeing kind of the evolution of the law too is the concept of states as laboratories of democracy, but also laboratories of innovation. And so often states will be the first movers when it comes to regulating innovative technology and really moving the ball forward on creative laws. So I have to make a quick plug for Chief Judge Sutton of the Sixth Circuit has a great book about states as laboratories of democracy and innovation too. And he's kind of someone that a lot of us in the state SG world have very much looked up to over the course of his career. But it really is true that as we work to regulate new and evolving technologies on a federal level, states are often the first movers to innovate in that regard.
I think that's a fair observation, Michelle, and I think it's even more relevant at this current point in history, right? As Congress kind of, I think we could agree mostly that Congress is kind of struggling to find its feet and figure out what exactly it wants to enact and how it wants to enact it, and as that occurs, right, more pressure is put on the states because there's still a need for regulation in these areas. And you look at some of the states like Utah or Colorado or Texas or California and how they have regulated, for example, within the social media space or age verification or artificial intelligence, right? They're all kind of on that leading edge that then other states look to and say, oh, they've already put this in place. Maybe this is something that we can just amend slightly to make sure it fits within our regulatory regime and then move on from there. And I think that your observation of that, like the states continue to be that laboratory of democracy and innovation, right? They're filling that role very, very appropriately.
So we talked earlier about multi-state investigations, and I just want to return to that quickly, get your thoughts, because I know Michelle and I have been on the defense side of this, and I think she's been on the government side of this. Let's face it, it can be overwhelming, maybe intimidating to face 50 different plaintiffs, to face 20 different states, let alone 50. What's your advice to folks dealing with multi-states and maybe how to chop them down to something that's bite-sized if they're facing an investigation like that?
I don't want to be too repetitive, but I think that one of the keys is, establishing those relationships and being proactive in those relationships. And I think that, one of the things that I've seen is that very rarely is a company caught off guard that an AG is inquiring about something. Usually there's something out there that has started rumbling and they're somewhat aware. A good example of this is several years ago, there was a large collection of states that looked into what was called average wholesale pricing. And our Attorney General, Lawrence Wasden at the time, he had a rule, and he said, "Look, we're not going to sue anybody until we've given them notice that we have an issue and the opportunity to come in and talk about that issue, right? Tell us why we're wrong or what we're missing or whatever it is." And so we sent these out to all of the companies participating in this process. We got 3 responses. My personal favorite response was one company actually responded to us and said, "Yep, you got us. We want to settle. How do we do it?" Then we had a group of companies that said, "Well, your characterization of this isn't quite right. We'd like to come in and meet with you and explain why we do what we do," and that. They came in. There was a group of companies that after their explanation, the AG was like, "Yep, you're right. We're not going to do anything." There was another group of companies that were like, "We're going to probably have to look a little bit more into this." And then there was a group of companies that just didn't respond. Well, if it's a company that just doesn't respond, there's only one recourse left for us. And to me, right, it comes back to like there's a group of folks out there that are afraid to interact with AGs because they think, oh, if I pop my head up, bad things are going to happen. That's not necessarily true. As I said, right, the AGs, they have priorities, they're human, they're lawyers, right? They understand the dynamics of litigation and liability and all of those sorts of things. And so I think that to your point of it being a little bit intimidating, it is, but it's also like we're attorneys of big, intimidating companies and whatnot, right? There's plenty of intimidation to go around and occupy the room, but I don't think the intimidation factor is anything that wields results, right? It's the ability to sit down and interact on a human level that actually winds up getting us to where we need to be.
So you mentioned coming in and meeting with AGs, and that's something that we will often advise our clients to do and come with them to do. Do you have any specific tips for when attorneys are reaching out on behalf of their clients to schedule a meeting with an AG's office, when folks are in the meeting with the AG's office? Are there specific things that you found are particularly effective when engaging with an attorney general in that context or their staff?
Yes. I think that, I think that folks should always be kind of deferential and respectful of the magnitude of the AG's office. Like it's a lot of AGs have offices that are in the state capital, and to me, that's one of those places where, this is going to sound kind of trite, but that's where we wear shiny shoes, right? Like it's the big time, so to speak. It's like if you go to the U.S. Supreme Court, right? You're not going to show up in shorts and a polo shirt. And I think that goes a long way. I think the other thing that I've seen where folks have been really successful is their ability to listen while they're in the office. A lot of folks are so eager to make their pitch to the AG that they don't step back and say, okay, what's on the AG's mind? And a lot of times the AG is trying to solve a problem on behalf of their citizens. And so if you can come in and say, look, I recognize that we have this issue, here are a couple of ideas for how we might be able to solve it, right? And that goes a long way. And I think that, to me, those are just kind of basic elements that can really improve that dynamic. The other piece of advice that I would offer is a lot of times I've seen folks that are like, I just want to meet with the attorney general. I will let you know that there is a lot of merit to meeting with a chief deputy or a consumer protection chief or a chief of, the administrative law division or whoever it is. And the reason why is because you may meet with the attorney general, but usually the very first thing the attorney general is, he's going to turn to whoever his or her subject matter expert and say, what do you think? And so there may be some prep work that you can do in meeting with those other folks before you get to the AG, or maybe it can get resolved without getting to the AG, and then that person relays the message, hey, this is a great company or a great general counsel or a great law firm to work with. They really helped us navigate this. They didn't make it more than it needed to be, and we should be open to working with them in the future.
I'm going to take this clip of the last 45 seconds of what you just said, Brian, and play it for every client that says to me, you used to practice with DC's Attorney General. Why don't you go over staff's head and just call him?
Yeah.
And because, there's that expression, you get one shot. If you shoot at the king, you best not miss. And
Right.
and you're exactly right. They're going to defer to their staff.
Yeah.
And, do things the right way.
If I can underscore your point a little bit, Eric, nobody likes to have their head gone over either. And so I always think of it as, you may win a battle where you go over somebody's head, but what have you done for that relationship into the future? And I always think about it in those terms, right?
And the staff lawyer whose head you go over 3 years from now will be the assistant chief, and then
Right.
they'll be the deputy chief.
Right.
Who knows? They might be right. So,
Or the attorney general, right?
or the attorney general.
When you look at Governor Stein in North Carolina, right? Before he was governor, he was attorney general. Before he was attorney general, he was the consumer protection chief. And so, you can see these folks do the work. They work very hard. They're incredibly talented, and they progress through the office.
I think also the AGs themselves, they have a staff for a reason, right? And so if the goal
Right.
is to go over the staff's head directly to the attorney general, if it's a matter that could have been resolved by their staff, just like the general counsel of a company appreciates it when their staff is able to solve a problem, so too does an attorney general appreciate it when problems can be solved with their staff. So understanding those internal mechanisms and understanding how things get done within an AG's office is something that's really crucial.
Absolutely. And I think that, to me, that's where, Michelle, you and Eric really add your value, right? The folks that have been in AG offices and then can say, look, this is the way that you work through this system, and these are the key folks to talk to, right? That's an invaluable resource for folks.
I appreciate you saying that. I'm gonna take that clip also.
Well, we want to transition over a little bit to the relationship with the AG community. So, you've been described as a trusted advisor to attorneys general and their senior staff. How do you foster trust and engagement across such a diverse group of leaders?
So I think it comes down to two words, and the words are honesty and responsiveness. Right? If an AG or an office asks you something, give them the answer, even if it's not the answer they're looking for, but let them know, here's what we're looking at. Here are the options to deal with what we're looking at, but get back to them and let them know. Sometimes there's a tendency for folks, particularly if they have to deliver bad news, to delay it. And if you delay bad news, it only makes it that much worse when it's ultimately delivered, and it may even erode some trust in your judgment or competency. And so, to me, honesty and responsiveness are the key to that. The third thing is listening. And I think that attorneys mightily struggle with listening as a profession. And it's because we have been trained to identify the problem and immediately offer, like, this is how you deal with that problem. And we don't fully hear what's going on with somebody. One of the functions that I had when I was in the Idaho Attorney General's office is every now and then we'd have a constituent that was very adamant about having to speak with an attorney, and so that it would get beyond our constituent services folks. And so I had this one gentleman on the phone who started out the call very, very angry. And as he talked, I didn't say anything except ask him questions like, have you tried this? Have you thought of this? At one point in the call, he actually stopped and he said, wait a minute, are you actually trying to help me? And and again, right, like the answer is yes, I was absolutely trying to help you. But as we started out and we talked about confidence in government, right? People expect or they think, oh, if I contact government, it's going to be a hassle and there's going to be bureaucracy and nobody wants to help me. They just want to, do their thing and tell me all the reasons why I can't do what I want to do. And I think that to me, that's part of how you establish that trust and credibility is come in and be like, we're here to help you. We want to hear what's going on in your world and how we can address that.
I've heard from state enforcers, and I've been on panels with state enforcers where they make that exact point, Brian, and it should be repeated because I don't think people believe it. State AGs who say we're not in the business of gotcha. We're not just looking to sue you and put you out of business. Sometimes a lot of this, I'm not sure if there's a question here or just an observation, but maybe the mix between law enforcement versus business education. What does NAAG do in terms of educating businesses so that they don't get in trouble in the first place? And there is no
Right.
game of gotcha.
Right. And I think that's an accurate description. When you talk about someone that has a law enforcement function, right, and you think about a toolbox, a lot of times folks look at an attorney general as just a hammer. And if you look at the attorney general as just a hammer, well, if all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. But an attorney general, based on their staff and the scope and breadth of what they do, right? They've got planers, they've got screwdrivers, they've got drills, like whatever, they've got tape measures, whatever it is that they need to solve the problem is within their toolbox. And it does you a disservice to just think, oh, we're going to get hammered because there's so many more options and opportunities there.
Absolutely. So I guess let's ask you to look into your crystal ball for a little bit. Hopefully it's not too cloudy. What are your main goals for NAAG over the next couple of years, if you could tell us?
So, I mean, the first goal is to continue to serve the attorneys general and to evolve in a way that best serves what the attorneys general need. And so that's goal one, is to continue to be a service organization for the attorneys general with the highest functionality that we can offer them. The second goal is to when we go into 2026, I think there's more than 20 attorneys general up for election. Out of those attorneys general up for election, I think at least 10 of them thus far are either term limited, they're running for governor or US senator or Congress. And so that's going to be a massive turnover event. And so how do we bring in this next group of attorneys general into office so that they have a smooth and successful transition from their campaign to serving the people as attorneys general? And those are probably the two highest goals that we have at this point in time.
Awesome. Well, we have a couple personal questions to wrap up with. You've won some awards for your
Sure.
leadership and teaching, and you're known in the AG community for your humility and humor. What advice would you give lawyers or public servants looking to make an impact?
So I think to me, I would give two pieces of advice to kind of newer or up and coming attorneys. The first is become a very good listener and understand that in order to be successful, you have to understand what is being asked of you or for you, and take the time to really listen instead of just responding. Uh, the second element, and this comes from that listening, is take the time to establish your credibility. I've seen a lot of folks that, they graduate from law school and they've got these law professors that have, pumped them up and given them a ton of confidence. And then they jump into a a conference or a meeting or something like that, and they've got all the answers. And it's one of those things where, okay, like let's step back and think that through. I had when I was a third year law student, I interned at a district attorney's office and I was certified. And so we went to court. I was doing a trial and the police officer couldn't show up for the trial. And one of the senior DAs asked me, said, so what are you going to do since this police officer can't show up? And I said, well, I think I can get this police report in under the business records exception. And he just laughed at me and he said, did your law professor tell you that? And I said, yeah, it came up in evidence class. And he said, well, if you decide to do that, let me know. And I was like, oh, so you can help me? He's like, no, I want to watch it. And it was a really good lesson of like, you get filled with these great ideas and maybe they'll work and maybe they won't. But at some point you have to step back and say, okay, I have to learn how to do this job the right way in the group that I'm in and have that credibility established from the ground up.
Yeah, and I think bringing it full circle, that's one of the great benefits of an organization like NAAG, because as you're navigating new AG offices, as you're navigating new types of investigations or inquiries or just attorneys you don't know, having a community of people that you can turn to be able to understand where they're coming from, to be able to build your credibility, it's so important. And I can say, at least from my experience, both on the state AG side and on the private practice side, NAAG has served such an instrumental role in doing that over the course of my practice. And so we're really, really thrilled to have you on for you to share more about NAAG and your career. And we really look forward to staying involved in the state AG world and further playing a role both with NAAG and at NAAG events. So thank you so much for joining us today.
And I'll just echo.
Thank you. And sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to echo Michelle's thanks. This was a wonderful conversation and really appreciated your time and your insights.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to On the Agenda from Steptoe. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss future episodes. To learn more about Steptoe, visit steptoe.com. When the stakes are high, experience matters.